The rain had been relentless all evening, turning the city into a blur of neon reflections and wet pavement. Keanu Reeves pulled his coat tighter around him as he walked down a quiet street, the cold barely registering. He had always preferred walking to taking a car when he had the time. It reminded him of the old days, back when he was just another struggling actor in Hollywood, before the Matrix turned him into a global star. As he neared a dimly lit bus stop, Keanu noticed a man hunched over on the bench, a tattered hoodie barely shielding him from the rain. His belongings, a few worn books, a backpack, and a cardboard sign that read, "Aspiring filmmaker. Anything helps," were neatly arranged beside him. Keanu slowed down. He had met a lot of people in his life, but something about this man made him pause. Maybe it was the way he held onto a small notebook, scribbling feverishly despite the weather, as if his thoughts were more urgent than the rain pouring down on him. Keanu approached quietly. "Hey, man," he said gently. The man looked up, startled, his face thin and tired but alive with a sharp, observant gaze. "Keanu Reeves?" he asked, blinking in disbelief. Keanu smiled. "Yeah. And you are?" The man hesitated before answering. "Dylan Carter." Keanu glanced at the sign. "Aspiring filmmaker, huh?" Dylan gave a self-conscious shrug. "More like failing filmmaker. But yeah, trying." Keanu nodded, then gestured toward the notebook in Dylan's hands. "What are you working on?" Dylan hesitated, then handed it over. "It's a script. Or at least, the beginnings of one." Keanu flipped through the pages, scanning the handwritten lines of dialogue and scene descriptions. Even in its rough form, there was something raw and intriguing about it. "This is good," Keanu said sincerely. Dylan let out a dry chuckle. "Tell that to the production companies that won't even let me in the door." Keanu looked at him, thoughtful. He'd seen this story play out before. Dreams crushed under the weight of rejection, talent wasted because no one would take a chance. And he knew, in that moment, that he wasn't going to let this be just another passing encounter. "Tell you what," Keanu said, standing up. "Let's grab a bite to eat. I want to hear more about your story." Dylan blinked, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Are you serious?" Keanu grinned. "Dead serious. And trust me, you don't want to turn down free food." Dylan hesitated for only a second before scrambling to gather his things. As they walked toward a nearby diner, Dylan had no idea that this night, this single moment of kindness, would change his life forever. The small diner was nearly empty, save for a tired-looking waitress refilling coffee cups and a couple of night shift workers eating in silence. The neon sign outside flickered, casting a blue glow onto the rain-streaked windows. Keanu and Dylan slid into a booth, the warmth of the place immediately cutting through the damp cold. Dylan fidgeted with the menu, still processing the surreal turn his night had taken. Across from him sat Keanu Reeves, an actor he had idolized for years, now casually wiping rain off his jacket like this was the most normal thing in the world. "What's good here?" Keanu asked, setting down the menu. "No idea," Dylan admitted. "I usually just get coffee." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "How about we change that?" He waved the waitress over. "We'll take 2 burgers, extra fries, and whatever pie is fresh." Dylan started to protest, but Keanu just gave him a look that said don't argue. So he didn't. As they waited for their food, Keanu leaned forward. "So, tell me about your script." Dylan hesitated, unsure of where to begin. No one had ever asked him that before, not like this, with real interest. "It's about second chances," he said finally. "A guy who's given up on himself gets an unexpected opportunity, and it changes everything." Keanu's lips curved into a small smile. "Sounds like something I'd watch." Dylan let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, getting someone to read it is another story." Keanu nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. Hollywood was brutal to newcomers. Studios didn't take chances on unknowns. And talent? Talent wasn't always enough. "So, how'd you end up here?" Keanu asked gently, gesturing toward the backpack by Dylan's side. Dylan exhaled, staring at the condensation forming on his water glass. Long story. I moved here a few years ago, fresh out of film school, thinking I'd make it big. He smirked at his own naivety. Got some meetings, even had a script optioned once. But nothing panned out. Then money ran out. And, well, he gestured vaguely around him, as if to say, and here we are. Keanu listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When Dylan finished, he asked simply, "Do you still believe in the story you're trying to tell?" Dylan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. I do." "Then don't stop," Keanu said. "You never know who might believe in it too." Before Dylan could respond, the waitress arrived with their food, and for the first time in months, Dylan ate like a man who wasn't worried about where his next meal would come from. As the meal wrapped up, Keanu pulled out his phone. "Give me your email." Dylan froze. "Wait, what?" Keanu smiled. "I want to read the script when you finish it. And I might know some people who'd be interested." Dylan's hands trembled slightly as he took out a crumpled receipt and scribbled down his email. Keanu tucked it into his pocket like it was something valuable. "You mean it?" Dylan asked, his voice quiet. Keanu met his gaze. "I don't say things I don't mean." Dylan didn't know what to say. So he just nodded, overwhelmed, as Keanu settled the bill. As they stepped outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the city lights. "Where are you staying tonight?" Keanu asked. Dylan shifted uncomfortably. "I've got a spot." Keanu studied him for a moment before reaching into his wallet and pulling out a few $100 bills. He pressed them into Dylan's hand before he could protest. "This isn't charity," Keanu said firmly. "This is an investment. Finish your script." Dylan's throat tightened. He wanted to refuse, but something about the way Keanu said it, like he expected him to succeed, made him take the money without argument. "Thank you," Dylan said, the words barely above a whisper. Keanu smiled. "Don't thank me yet. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "When you make it, pay it forward." Dylan nodded. "I will." Keanu clapped him on the shoulder, then turned and walked off into the city, disappearing into the night like some kind of cinematic legend. Dylan stood there for a long time, gripping the money in one hand and his notebook in the other. He had been ready to give up. But now, he had a reason to keep going. Dylan didn't sleep that night. He found a cheap motel, paid for a few nights with the money Keanu had given him, and spread his script pages out on the bed. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was writing into the void. Someone was waiting for this, and not just anyone. Keanu Reeves. He worked obsessively, rewriting scenes, refining dialogue, making sure every page was as tight as it could be. By the time the sun rose, he had something he was finally proud of. With shaking hands, he sent the script to the email Keanu had given him, along with a simple message. Subject: the script you asked for. Message: I don't know if this will amount to anything, but here it is. Thank you for everything. Dylan. Then he waited. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Dylan checked his email constantly, but there was nothing from Keanu. He told himself not to get his hopes up. Keanu was a busy guy. Maybe he never even saw the email. Maybe he had been just being polite. Doubt started creeping back in. Then, late one evening, just as Dylan was about to give up hope, his phone pinged. New email from Keanu Reeves. Dylan's heart slammed against his ribs as he opened it. Dylan. I read it. And I liked it. A lot. Let's talk. Keanu. Dylan sat there, staring at the screen, unable to breathe. Keanu Reeves had read his script. And he liked it. This was it. The meeting was surreal. A week later, Dylan found himself sitting across from Keanu in a quiet cafe in West Hollywood, his hands gripping his coffee cup like it was an anchor. So, Keanu said, setting the script on the table, now covered in notes. Tell me, what do you want to do with this? Dylan hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before. I want to make it, he said. I want to direct it myself. Keanu studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we make that happen. Just like that. As if it was the simplest thing in the world. Over the next few weeks, Keanu introduced Dylan to people, producers, writers, people who could actually make things happen. Not everyone took the meeting seriously, but the fact that Keanu Reeves was vouching for him opened doors that would have otherwise stayed locked. Slowly, painfully, things started moving forward. Dylan landed a meeting with an indie production company. They loved the script but weren't sure about letting a first-time director handle it. "We'll buy it," they offered. "But we'll bring in someone more experienced to direct." Dylan almost said yes. Almost. But then he thought of that night at the diner, of Keanu's words. "Do you still believe in the story you're trying to tell?" "Yes," Dylan had answered then. And now, he found himself shaking his head. "No deal. I direct or it doesn't happen." It was a gamble. The company passed. Dylan was back at square one. But Keanu? Keanu just smiled. "Good," he said. "You stood your ground." Months passed. Dylan took whatever work he could, freelance editing, commercial shoots, anything to survive while he kept pushing the script. Rejection after rejection came in. But each time, Keanu reminded him. "All it takes is one yes." And then, one day it came. A small but passionate production company agreed to fund the film. The budget was tight, but it was enough. Dylan was finally going to direct his first movie. And Keanu? Keanu signed on to star in it. Just like that, everything changed. The moment Keanu officially joined the project, everything shifted. Suddenly, producers who had ignored Dylan's calls were reaching out. A-list actors expressed interest. Bigger studios wanted to buy the script outright. But Dylan had fought too hard for this. He wasn't going to let anyone take it away now. With a modest budget and an indie film crew, production finally began. Dylan stood on set, holding a director's slate, looking around in disbelief. This was real. Keanu, ever the professional, arrived on set early every day, treating Dylan with the same respect he would a seasoned director. There were no ego clashes, no big Hollywood star attitude, just Keanu, giving his all. "You nervous?" Keanu asked before the first shot. Dylan swallowed hard. "Terrified." Keanu grinned. "Good. Means you care." Then the cameras rolled, and Dylan called out his first official, real-life command as a director. Action. But filmmaking was never easy. A week into production, they lost a key location. A month in, a major financial backer pulled out, cutting their budget nearly in half. The worst blow came when an unexpected studio production delayed Keanu's availability, forcing them to shoot the movie in a condensed, grueling schedule. Dylan barely slept. He was running on caffeine, stress, and sheer willpower. One night, after a brutal 16-hour shoot, he sat alone in the editing bay, staring at the footage. Doubt crept in. Was any of this even good? Was he in over his head? Keanu found him there, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling over his keyboard. "Take a break," Keanu said, sitting beside him. "I can't," Dylan muttered. "If this flops, I'm done. I'll never get another shot." Keanu nodded, thinking. Then he said, "You know, The Matrix almost fell apart 3 times during filming." Dylan looked up. "Studio wanted to shut us down," Keanu continued. "Said we were over budget. Said the Wachowskis didn't know what they were doing." He smirked. "Now it's one of the biggest movies of all time." Dylan exhaled slowly. "So what do I do?" Keanu clapped him on the shoulder. "You keep going." So he did. He fought for every shot, every edit, every performance. He worked harder than he ever had in his life. And when they finally wrapped, Dylan knew this wasn't just some indie passion project. This was something special. The problem? No one else knew it yet. When they shopped the finished film around, major distributors passed. Too small. Not commercial enough. No market for it. Dylan could feel it slipping away. Months went by. Festivals rejected them. The dream was on life support. But Keanu wasn't done fighting. "I've been here before," he told Dylan one night. "We're not giving up." And just like that, Keanu called in one last favor, pulling strings to get the movie into a prestigious indie film festival as a last-ditch effort. This was it. Their final shot. And Dylan? Dylan had no idea that this screening would change everything. The festival screening felt like a dream. Dylan sat in the back of the packed theater, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. On the massive screen in front of him was his movie, his story, his vision, brought to life by actors, cameras, and pure perseverance. Keanu sat beside him, as calm as ever, watching with quiet focus. The audience was transfixed. Then the credits rolled. For a single, agonizing second, there was silence. Then applause. It started small, then grew, then erupted into a standing ovation. Dylan's breath hitched. This wasn't polite clapping. This was real. This was people feeling something. Keanu nudged him. "Go. Take it in." Dylan hesitated, then stood and faced the crowd. The applause swelled. Some people even wiped away tears. That night, everything changed. Within hours, the buzz exploded. Studios that had ignored Dylan were suddenly calling. Streaming platforms wanted exclusive deals. Critics praised the film as raw, heartfelt, and masterfully directed. And then came the offer that sealed it all. One of Hollywood's biggest indie distributors wanted the film for a wide theatrical release. It was happening. For real. A few months later, Second Chances hit theaters. It wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. Audiences connected with its message. Reviews were glowing. Industry insiders called Dylan Hollywood's next great director. And Keanu? Keanu's performance was hailed as one of his best in years. After a string of commercial disappointments, Second Chances reignited his career, reminding everyone of the depth he was capable of. When awards season rolled around, the film picked up nominations. Dylan found himself on red carpets, giving interviews, shaking hands with people he had once only dreamed of meeting. And through it all, Keanu was there, never taking credit, never making it about himself. One night, after a particularly big win, Dylan and Keanu sat together on a balcony, looking out at the city. "You saved my life," Dylan said quietly. Keanu shook his head. "Nah. I just reminded you what you were capable of." Dylan thought about that for a moment. "You know, people always talk about your kindness. The internet's obsessed with it." Keanu smirked. "That's so?" Dylan nodded. "But they don't get it. It's not just about what you do for people. It's about how you do it. No ego. No expectations. Just real." Keanu took a sip of his drink, then smiled. "Well, guess that makes two of us now." Dylan chuckled, shaking his head. "Not quite. But I'll get there." Keanu raised his glass. "Just remember, when the next Dylan Carter comes along, pay it forward." Dylan clinked his glass against Keanu's. "I will." And he meant it. Because years ago, when he had been at his lowest, someone had believed in him. And now? It was his turn.